On September 17, 1972, while American soldiers were still fighting a war in Vietnam, a TV series about a previous war premiered on American television that would change the landscape of TV forever. It started off with weak ratings and was at risk of being cancelled, but it ended up going on to break critical and ratings records for years to come. The series was MASH, a wartime comedy about irreverent doctors coping with the chaos and violence of working in a field hospital during the Korean War. So how did a sitcom about such dark subject matter that dealt directly and powerfully with hot-button political and social topics become one of the most beloved TV series in American history? Let's find out with our 10 incredible things about MASH.
I don't hear nothing. Wait for it!
And number 10. The show. Based on the movie. Based on the book. Based on the real experiences. When the show premiered in 1972, 2.5 years had passed since the movie MASH was released in theatres. Written by Ring Lardner Jr. and directed by the brilliant Robert Altman, the film was an experimental and wildly chaotic comedy. Released in 1970, the film took place during the Korean War, but was clearly commenting on the current Vietnam War. It was the third highest grossing film of the year, and it won the highest honour at the Cannes Film Festival. The film is based on the book MASH, a novel about 3 army doctors. The first in a series of novels written by real-life army surgeon H. Richard Hornberger, under the pseudonym Richard Hooker. The book was published in 1968, so the time from the release of the book to the beginning of the TV series was barely over 4 years, and it had already garnered an amazing reputation. Number 9. The Spinoffs. Everyone knows that a TV series can't be truly amazing unless it has at least one spin-off and possibly more. Friends had Joey, Cheers had Frasier, Happy Days had several, including Mork and Mindy and Laverne and Shirley. But what about MASH? What carried the torch for the 4077th after the series ended? The one most people remember is one they didn't see that much of. It was called After MASH, and it focused on 4 characters from the original series. Colonel Potter, Corporal Klinger, Father Mulcahy, and Klinger's Korean bride Soon Lee. The group worked in a hospital in Missouri, and the series was markedly different from its progenitor. It did boast an appearance from Radar O'Reilly, which brings us to another spin-off called Walter. It was intended to be a series about Radar becoming a police officer. It never went to series, and it ran as a special TV event only once. The final spin-off is another odd one. Trapper John MD is a series based on the character introduced in the movie and played by Wayne Rogers for 3 years on the original MASH. However, the spin-off series took place nearly 30 years after the events of the movie and series, and none of the actors or characters besides Trapper John ever appeared. It did run for 7 seasons, however, and it was by far the most successful spin-off from MASH.
Well, Trapper John's kind of a legend, part of the MASH folklore.
Number 8. The War That Went On Forever. There are few TV concepts that make it to series, and even fewer that finish an entire first season. The most rare of series become popular enough to last multiple seasons, and become iconic and memorable parts of American history. MASH shattered the expectations of any series, lasting 11 seasons and 256 episodes. It lasted as long as Cheers, and longer than Friends. In fact, it ran longer than the war that the show was based on, by a lot. The Korean War lasted from 1950 to 1953, almost exactly 3 years. With 11 years worth of episodes, MASH lasted over 3 times as long as the war itself. Not a bad statistic. Number 7. The brilliant Gimmick episodes. The writers on MASH already had a daunting challenge in finding ways to continually be funny and original in the dark and limited setting provided to them by the concept of the series. Never one to back down from a challenge, the writers' room rose to the occasion and created some of the most original, groundbreaking episodes for any series, let alone a half-hour comedy. It started in early seasons, with black and white fake documentary episodes about camera crews coming to interview the members of the MASH unit, but the longer the series lasted, the more bold the experiments got. They did an episode in real time as they tried to save a single patient who'll die in 22 minutes without the proper procedure. They did an entire episode from the literal point of view of an injured patient. They had an episode which peeked into the strange and revealing dreams of the characters. And they even had an entire episode where Hawkeye does one long monologue to a Korean family who doesn't understand him because he's trying to keep from falling asleep with a concussion. Series as varied as The West Wing and Buffy the Vampire Slayer were highly influenced by MASH's brilliant episode concepts and structures. Number 6. Alan Alda, The Golden Child. Speaking of award darlings, no one fits that category more than Alan Alda, although you'll forgive me if I don't have an impression prepared. In the breakout performance of Benjamin Hawkeye Pierce, Alda was clearly the star, even in an ensemble as strong as the one MASH had. Of the 100 plus Emmy nominations, Alda was responsible for almost a fourth of them on his own, getting 25 of them over the course of the series. And it's not just for acting either. In addition to playing one of the most loved characters in TV history, he also directed 31 episodes of the series, and he wrote 13 of the scripts. In fact, he was the first person in the history of the Emmys to win awards for writing, directing and acting on the same series. After MASH, Alda went on to success as a writer and director of feature films too. Number 5. An awards darling. During its run on television, MASH garnered a whopping 109 Emmy nominations in its 11 seasons. That's an average of almost 10 nominations per season. It also boasted multiple nominations and wins from the Golden Globes, Directors Guild, Writers Guild, Peabody Awards, and even several Humanitas prizes. In addition to the awards the series earned, the movie itself was also honoured when it was released. It was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, winning the one for Best Adapted Screenplay. Because of that, MASH may be one of the only entertainment properties to have won both Emmys and Oscars for the same story. Number 4. The truly disturbing theme song. There were only 2 holdovers from the MASH movie to the series. The first was actor Gary Burghoff playing Radar O'Reilly. The second was the theme song. In the show, it's a catchy song for guitar and trumpet, and when you hear it, you might even picture the comedic freeze frame at the end of the episode. However, the origin of the song has darker roots. The song is called Suicide is Painless, Goodbye Monetization, and it was used in the movie during the opening and during a darkly comical scene where a dentist decides to kill himself. Television audiences of the day probably wouldn't have understood how a song with such depressing lyrics could be funny, so they decided to go with an instrumental version instead. If you haven't heard the lyrics, I suggest you go look it up. Number 3. The Great Laugh Track Battle. While the series was a comedy, it was a delicate balance of tones. The comedy came from the antics of the Doctors, but the need for those antics came from a dark place. The Doctors needed to cope with the endless violence and chaos of war, so the series had to be very careful how it handled the laughs. Which is why the creators fought CBS so hard when the network said they wanted a laugh track for the show. All sitcoms of the time had a laugh track, and CBS seemed unwilling to budge. Eventually, the show's creators were able to talk CBS into a compromise. There could be a laugh track during the standard antics from the Doctors, but as soon as they entered the operating room, the laugh track would stop. CBS agreed, and they moved forward. Number 2. The original creator did not love the series. The writer of the original novel and several of its sequels, Richard Hornberger, always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the TV series. While its immense popularity allowed for Hornberger to continue to write and make money from the book series, he was never happy with the perspective the series had on war. While the series was staunchly anti-war, Hornberger wasn't, and while no one could fault the original creator for having a different perspective than the show's creators, the decision to make the series unambiguously opposed to war connected with audiences of the time, and made it one of the most successful series ever to air. Number 1. A ratings juggernaut. Although MASH struggled in its first season with low ratings, the show eventually went on to become one of the most successful and popular TV series in American history. But nothing could prepare the world for the results of its final episode, the 90-minute Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen. The episode was watched by nearly 125 million viewers when it aired. In 1983, that number accounted for about 77% of the viewing public in the United States. That was a record for anything that aired on television, and it held that record for 27 years until it was eventually beaten by a Super Bowl broadcast. Can you imagine? In terms of television shows, it still holds the record for the most watched single episode of television, a record that, quite frankly, is unlikely to ever be broken. And there you have it! In the annals of television history, who would have thought that one of the most successful series of all time would be a half-hour sitcom about doctors in the middle of a war zone? but the brilliant writing and the amazing cast made MASH undoubtedly an all-time classic series. So if you haven't watched it before, or you haven't seen it recently, set aside a few months to binge watch one of the high watermarks in television history. For Councilism, I've been Kieran, and remember that you can check out more stuff like this on www.councilism.co.uk. Why not, if you're feeling spicy, give us a little slippery slide of the subscribe button and a little naughty nudge of the bell icon, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.